Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you to be with us in our interesting, I hope, session, Health Technology Assessment. Let me introduce first our panelists today. Daniel is a health strategist and trusted sparring partner at the intersection of policy, communication, and healthcare leadership. He has held senior roles across AstraZeneca, CSL, Vifor, Bristol, Myers Squibb, and Novartis, working locally, regionally, and globally. His expertise spans Swiss health policy, market access, commercial strategy, patient advocacy, and life science communication. A trained lawyer with a PhD and LLM in health law and bioethics, he founded Advisory Environment to bring clarity, pragmatic execution, and trusted guidance to complex healthcare and policy environment. Svetoslav is a clinical pharmacist and associate professor in pharmaceutical regulation and pharmacy practice at the Medical University Pleven, Bulgaria. His research focuses on pharmaceutical regulation, medication, safety pharmacoepidemiology, pharmacoeconomics, and clinical trials, with particular interest in improving evidence-based decision-making and patient access to therapies. He is actively involved in clinical research projects investigating national medicine use. Associate Professor Stoev has also been advising several regulatory and non-government institutions and has also co-chaired the Bulgarian Ethics Committee for Clinical Trials. He is a member of several international scientific organizations, including the European Society of Clinical Pharmacy, the International Society of Pharmacovigilance, and the International Society for Pharmacoepidemiology. Gergely has more than 17 years' experience in the banking sector as an attorney at law. Gergely has been active in the pulmonary hypertension community since 2010, board member of PHA Europe from 2012 to 2015, from 2015 to 2023, project manager mainly focusing on advocacy work. He is participating in ERS Clinical Research Collaboration, PHAROS, as patient representative and was one of the 2 patient representatives who has ever been part of the task force on ERS ESC guidelines on PH. Most recently plays an active role in the rare respiratory field, medical steering committee member of ERN Lung, member of EuroDis Rare 2030. Since 2023, Gergely has been working as a project manager in ERN Lung and as a policy advisor at EU-PFF. Stefano, my colleague from the board. Stefano has been a member of the EU-PFF board for 6 years. In Italy, he leads a patient organization focused on lung transplantation and rare lung diseases. In 2012, after undergoing a lung transplant due to cystic fibrosis, he became actively involved in patient advocacy, recognizing the urgent need for support within the IPF community. So, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Health technology assessments. I allow myself to stand a bit up because we want to keep it a bit engaging. Who of you feels very comfortable with this 3 letters? Like, who of you knows or feels very comfortable what HTA is? Okay, any one of you fancy to come up and replace me? Or? Okay. Very good. I give it a try and you correct me. There are 100 ways to describe HTA, so I just give my best shot. And me coming from Switzerland, actually, I always compare HTA to be like a Swiss Army knife. It's like you have different tools and you bring it all together. And that's like just like as a starter. But what is very important is that there are many existing definitions what HTA is. And when you look at it more from an academic approach, actually, there is, in many cases, people are talking about an HTA or that something is an HTA, but it's actually not. So I just wanted to be like to point this out at the beginning. But what is important is that high level speaking, HTA, Health Technology Assessment, is a tool to assess new medical technologies. And it doesn't matter if it's a medical device or it's a medicine. And basically to give a recommendation to a decision maker whether this technology should be made accessible for patients or not and paid through the health insurance or, for example, the NHS. And when you look at it more from an academic angle, you usually say there are 4 elements that are relevant to classify as an HTA. The first thing is that you have very clear and predefined questions, scientific questions you want to answer. And Klaroslav will go into detail on the PICO part in a minute or so. The second is HTA is usually interdisciplinary. So you use different scientific disciplines to answer this question. It's also, and it's important, you collect, assess, and appraise existing data. What you're not doing is you do not generate new data, usually. The third piece is, and it's super important, an HTA should be transparent. It should be, and it should be very independent, and all the processes should be like this. If it's not, you diminish the credibility of this report, of this scientific recommendation. And the last point is actually that you give this scientific recommendation that will lead eventually to a decision. And I already pointed to that, like what HTA is not. I'm just pointing this out. HTA is not primary research, so it's not like conducting a clinical trial. It's looking at all the clinical trials that are existing. And it's also not a systematic literature review or a meta-analysis. This is part of, or can be part of, an HTA, but alone it's not an HTA, and the same goes for health economic assessments. So that's just from a theoretical point of view. Now handing over to you, Sviatoslav.
Thank you for this nice introduction. We have already defined HTA as a structured, evidence-based process for decision making. But to see the real impact, we need to evaluate the real implication into the real practice. And where actually HTA is playing a role. The general assumption is that HTA is the preliminary, the initial part of the reimbursement decision. But actually, the correct answer, the right answer here is that HTA is applicable to each step of the medicine life cycle process. What I mean, everything starts with the early dialogue, I mean the research and development step. This is the right place, the right time, the stage when both stakeholders, companies, and regulatory authorities should start considering what evidence, what kind of information will be needed at a further level. Then comes the clinical trials, and finally the approval. Usually it's issued in a centralized level, issued by the EMA or and the European Commission. This is the stage when we answer the most important question. Is the medicine safe and effective? But access is not equal to approval. We need some more data to say whether we need to pay or not for the medicine. And that's the right moment when the HTA is applied. Because in HTA, experts evaluate whether we have a new medicine which works better than the one we already have, the other therapies we already have. And based on this, we can conclude whether the new medicine worth paying for or not. Then comes the reimbursement. This is maybe the most crucial moment for patients in scope of access, because the result of reimbursement decision is we have access and this access is covered, or it's delayed, or it's restricted. And then comes the post-launch phase, or the story ends with the real clinical practice. We continue collecting data regarding the cost-benefit ratio of medicines. And one very important reflection here, the small visual on the right. In some countries, I need to say that access is not equal to approval, but HTA is also not equal to access. What I mean, in Bulgaria, we have a situation in which the medicine has already been authorized. It has gone through a HTA procedure. The evaluation, the appraisal is positive, but we still have no reimbursement. You should go to another independent procedure for reimbursement, and the result is not confirmed. And it may take up to 2 years in some cases. Next slide, please. And as I already said, one centralized approval is not equal to immediate access. And I will explain why. You can see on the top, the EMA approval, one scientific decision for all European countries. But that does not mean immediate access in all European countries. That's the stage when the equality ends. After this stage, all different countries follow different pathways, different procedures with different stakeholders, with different institutions, different time frames, different competitors when evaluating the therapies and so on. What's the result? We have different timelines for access. We have different level of reimbursement in different countries, which means, on the language of the patients, unequal availability and sometimes even restricted access. So impact is particularly significant in rare diseases such as IPF because all this situation is additionally modified in these patients. And to see more deeply what's the reason for these different pathways, we should see the exact process of HTA, and I will give the floor to my colleagues to display it further.
Thank you, Svetoslav. Before we go into more detail, I wanted to, very high level, and in every country, like you just explained, HTA is lived differently. But like when you take this on a higher level, usually HTA, you can break it down in certain steps. And what we tried to illustrate here is what you also just said, like just because an HTA is positive, it doesn't mean that you get access in a country, because there is the decision maker who may say, we don't have the money for it, or we don't find the price. So what we first do, we distinguish between a decision maker who takes the decision and the HTA body, the independent scientific body who conducts the HTA. And what usually happens is either a manufacturer comes and initiates an HTA with a new drug, for example, or the decision maker, the government, says, let's do an HTA on a specific topic. And this is where they usually collaborate a little bit, like, okay, is this question, does it make sense, etc. And then the mandate goes over to the HTA body. And that's important because as of here, this is a safe space, because you also want this to be independent, very scientific and transparent. So they're looking at all the available evidence, they're screening it, they're looking at it with a very scientific approach, then they're appraising it, like for example by involving experts, just like to interpret the data, and based on this they formulate a recommendation. And the HTA report or the recommendation will be then handed over back to the decision maker saying, hey, from a scientific point of view, this medicine makes a lot of sense. And then a decision is taken whether HTA is reimbursed or not. It can also mean, by the way, just saying, it can also mean that a product is withdrawn from the market. We have this in Switzerland, for example, where they started to disinvest, like they started with disinvestment HTAs, which is a bit strange. Switzerland is one of the few countries who's doing that. But yeah, it's a different topic. Do you remember what I said, like what I think HTA is? Like, do you remember this army knife? This is now why I chose that. In HTA, like one of the core elements is that it's interdisciplinary. There are different scientific disciplines involved, and you have basically core disciplines like the medical and the economical assessment. They are usually done all the time. And then you have other disciplines that are more rarely, or like that sometimes are involved or not. And these can be ethical, social, or legal aspects that are considered. For example, a big mistake that was made in Switzerland, sorry, like coming always with the small country, but once they wanted to initiate an HTA on a technology, on a medicine that was shortly before the patent expired. And then it doesn't make a lot of sense to do an HTA because the price will anyway go down a lot, and the technology is like matured. And these are things that other disciplines can help with, or ethical questions that can be very relevant. So I'm just saying, like, this is what happens usually here. Like these disciplines are very rare, but if they are considered, it can, of course, like make the HTA much better from a recommendation perspective. Very good. Now handing over back to you on the medical discipline in particular.
We are like rock stars changing the scene. Okay, I already told you that we have different procedures in different countries. So it means that okay, I will formulate it like this. It depends where in Europe you live. On this, how quickly you will get the therapy, and the therapy will be paid or not. So the main idea is to standardize as much as we can this HTA process. And one of the approaches, the methodologies to standardize this medical evaluation as a core point of the HTA is to find the right way to formulate, to define the questions we ask. And here comes the PICO strategy. It's a very important but actually simple framework that help the experts to define the clinical questions when evaluating the cost-benefit of a medicine. The P stands for patient, or it defines the population. So it means which patients or patient cohorts or the patient groups we are studying. Then comes the I, which stands for intervention, or what is the treatment we are exploring, and the outcomes of this treatment further will be evaluated. Then comes the C for comparator. It's really important because comparators are different in different countries. Patients have no equal access to different medicines which we are actually comparing. So there is no point in comparing with something which is not available in a country because the decision, the final decision will be wrong. And then comes the outcome, maybe the most important thing in this acronym. It goes for O goes for outcome, but outcome is not just a digit, it's not a number. Outcome is actually what differs most in different countries, but is most important for the patients. And we should be very vigilant when defining the outcome. For example, whether it will be the quality of life, it will be just the effectiveness ratio of a medicine, whether it will be the ability of a patient as a result of taking the medicine to work in the garden or to take care of her grandchildren and so on. So the PICO is a method to define better the question in HTA. So instead of asking a vague or simple question like, does this medicine work? The question to be more precise and effective and to sound like, does the new therapy improve lung function compared to current treatment in patients with IPF? So the next slide, please. This is the basis to produce a really effective clinical assessment. But when I'm talking about clinical assessment, I would like to make one additional reflection and to deep dive into this clinical appraisal. In standard case, the HTA is based on a medical and economical appraisal, and the combination goes to the result to define whether it's rational to pay for medicine or not. In the standard situation, we have the medical background as clinical trials, evaluation of effectiveness compared to current therapies, evaluation of safety and tolerability profile, and quality of life outcomes. Then, on the other hand, we have the economics evaluation, which are the cost effectiveness ratio, budget impact, and long-term value for health systems. Ideally, in the best situation, we have a really robust data, and we can go to very good and clear, simple conclusions. But in real life, we don't have this ideal situation, and it's even more complex when we are talking about rare diseases or some specific situations. In conditions like IPF, we have specific challenges, and what I mean are the small patient populations, limited clinical evidence due to the small patient populations and the reality of the disease, greater uncertainty in results, and high unmet medical need. So based on these specific criteria, we should focus more on relevant outcomes. I mean, we should better define the outcomes. For example, some specific outcomes for this indication or for this patient population, we should step on real-world data. Of course, it's very, very important to have this real-world data and to evaluate the patient experience. When I told you that outcome is connected with the patient, patients are the most valuable resource of information that makes us, give us the right basis to make this evaluation properly. What I mean, HTA really seeks for real-world evidence and for robust evidence. But when we involve patients in this collection of real-world and robust evidence, we can, as experts, decide better not only this information is important, but for what aspect of patient life is really important. So I will give the floor again to my colleagues to explain it further.
Many thanks. I really hope that many of you might be aware that there's a game changer regulation in the EU dealing with health technology assessment. But actually it's not coming out from the blue, but there was some preparatory work we can call as a EU NetA. Actually, it's a voluntary network of HTA bodies from various countries. You can see the nice flags on the right-hand side with a specific aim. So the aim was to build up nice resources which can be relied upon when it comes to HTA, health technology assessment. So the main goal was to promote efficient use of HTA resources and naturally develop sustainable system for HTA knowledge sharing, with developing reliable, timely, and transparent information. Next slide, please. So the game changer is the HTA, so the Health Technology Assessment Regulation. You can see on the left-hand side that it's a step-by-step entry into force. It has been already applied for oncological products as well as advanced therapies. Rare disease is coming into play in 2028, and the full implementation is expected 2030. It will be actually the main stream for health technology assessment, solely generic products as well as those medications which do not require prescription will be will not be covered by this regulation. The main aim is also to terminate some of the previous collaborations like EU NetA. I can confirm that is happening because yesterday I just checked the web page I was referring to and it's no longer working. So it actually terminated by the HTR. But what is established, you might ask, why it's good for us? There are many, many expectations naturally about HTR. One is that we can gain some time in terms of market access authorization towards to real access by patients to these medications. How it might be implemented, you might ask, in a way that both the market authorization process as well as the health technology assessment process is starting at the very same phase. So the two procedures are simultaneously happening before different bodies. The system will be actually a hybrid one, and we also hope that it might contribute to more timely manner. The hybrid system means that some of the questions might be subject to HTA bodies at EU level, but as you might recall from morning discussion, some of the decisions remain at member state level. And these ones are the pricing and reimbursement issues. We, from patient perspective, should also welcome this regulation because as you can see on the bottom of the page, there is a clear role for patients and patient representatives within this system. Next slide, please. And next one. Probably it will be then you again.
I just allow myself, it's so important what you just said. I just wanted to say it again. Like this EU HTA is an attempt, like before it was like every country was doing their own HTAs and everyone did it a bit differently and had the different timelines. And the attempt is really, I just wanted to reiterate that, to streamline these processes, to reduce, reduce the application to become faster. And I think this overall is a good thing. And what you can read also in the HTA or in the HTA regulation is that the member states should give due consideration to the results of this assessment. So they are not like forced or bound to it, but they are at least, they have to consider it. And this is it's a big step towards standardization and harmonization, that at least in the medical part, you remember the Army knife with the different disciplines, they are doing the medical part here in the EU HTA, and there it's there should be more they should get more conform with the recommendation there. But, and you said this, the pricing, the health economic assessment, this all remains at the local level, and this is also why HTAs can turn out differently than at the local level. But at least this is an important, I think, a very important step to be aware of course, and a development that is worth to engage in. And this is also why we were asked, what is about the involvement of patients? What can patients do? And this is a bit of a difficult question. And that's when, we started with this picture in the sense of course, I think everyone would agree, yes, patients should be part of that, because if you are creating a recommendation towards the government saying, should this be reimbursed or not, should patients get access to a specific therapy or not, I think the patients are the one who have a say in that, right? But the question is, when you look back to what was said so far, this scientific approach requires also to find a balance between, kind of the one extreme, to not involve patients, because then it's super scientific, everything is clear, every step can be measured and reproduced 100%, or a full involvement where basically the patient would sit the entire time next to the researcher. Super boring, by the way. I did that, but but this is also a risk, because then patients or also other stakeholders could take too much of an influence on the HTA recommendation. And this is a balance that needs to be found, and every country changes that a bit. What we, and I hope I'm allowed to speak in the name of all of us, what we discussed is it's important to not to shy away from patient involvement, just because you are afraid that it could not be scientific anymore. And I think there are enough, and we heard this today actually, there are a lot of scientific ways to involve the voice of different stakeholders. So we heard the Delphi panel, I think, in a previous presentation. This is one option. You can also work with more transparency. If you make transparent who is actually giving expert advice, if you have criteria, when does someone qualify for an expert, etc., pp., then you can make this involvement much more structured and credible. And this is also important because if you involve all stakeholders and of course patients, once the decision is taken, people also feel heard and seen, and can probably also stand more behind the recommendation that is done. So this is a bit of a triangulation, as we say, when you do that. And this is now very theoretical, but still, I mean, in essence, it's super simple. Patient involvement is key, but, and this is where the scientific part comes in, you have to do this at the right time, with the right people, and also in the right way. And what I mean with this is, when you look back at this graph that we showed before, usually when you are in the decision-making area, you have people sitting in these boards who are representing all the patients across all disease areas. And this is also, I think it also makes sense because you also want to secure a certain equality of recommendation. But when you are in a very disease-specific, like HTA, you want the people who know exactly, what this treatment is about. Ideally, people who are participating in the clinical trials, who have felt experience of the treatment itself. And I think this is what I would recommend, or what we would recommend you to do, that when you're thinking about how you as EUPFF colleagues, like, could strengthen your patient involvement, think about where do we go? Where do we, like, put our energy at? Like, are we more engaging in this assessment appraisal, or are we trying to get more in the decision area? And of course, the solution is both ways, but the approach changes. Because here, I think, like, evidence that you have generated, patient insights that you have generated will be more likely, or would be helpful to influence to be considered in a recommendation, while the decision is then much more political. And usually what you do here is also to stay scientific in the HTA process. You try not to get people on next to the researchers. You consult them, as I said before. For example, by offering them a time to write a written recommendation, or like to give written input, which makes it more credible also than for the scientific assessment. So it does this just as a first primer on patient involvement. And right back to you, Gergely.
Many thanks for providing the context, but probably you might ask a very easy question. What actually the patient's role in such kind of HTA procedures? And on the right top, you can, actually on the left for currently, is that actually there are 2 points. We already heard that there might be some difficulties how we identify the unmet needs, but this is our key role within such kind of procedures. So we need to clearly communicate towards the HTA bodies what are the unmet needs we are struggling from. And the other point is that we need to highlight those difficulties or those challenges which are delivered or in connection with the available treatments. Before deeping dive into this topic, I would like to also highlight that for patient organization, it is very key how we try to help identify the patients who are involved in these procedures. This is a kind of step-by-step procedure you can see here in stages of expert involvement. But it is not only related to patients, I need to highlight. There's a little bit misunderstanding here, because in the HTA procedures, experts are identified not only as patients, and we can make distinction between patients, patient experts, patient advocates, but it also relates to physicians, because the main goal is to involve physicians in these discussions. So the first step might be to find an expert. From the oncology, we learned that it might be not very easy. We have some learned examples, because it should be very clearly defined what kind of indication we are talking about. And preparation should not be at the first, but we should already have started some preparation due to some conflict of interest problems. When it comes to that, we managed to find the expert patient and managed to help to better understand these procedures. We also try to need to involve these experts. And naturally, once we have experts in such kind of procedures, the ideas or their proposals should be taken into account. But without feedback, naturally, such kind of involvement might not be meaningful. But the patient's role on top of these 2 main points might be more sophisticated. We already learned about the PICO questions. So patients as well as physicians are in the position to comment such kind of PICOs, even fine-tune. We learn also from oncology, you can recall that it is also ongoing for a while, is that probably some subpopulation might be a kind of subject of discussions. Most recently, the European Medicines Agency published a very interesting and also comprehensive paper on patient experience data and how they use it within the medical access authorization process as well as the HTA process. So the second main role from our end is how we can provide the lived experience, which might be in various forms. We know that in many cases in clinical trials we use secondary endpoints as quality of life questionnaires and so on, but also within the HTA procedure, it's also meaningful. Once you are selected as an expert, you might expect that you are part of the procedure. This is what's really happening when we are trying to involve patients in the health technology assessment, because they need to contribute. They need to participate in hearings. They need to participate in discussions. And last but not least, and it's a little bit related to the patient evidence, we need to offer contextual information. Next slide, please. A most recent publication I'm trying to quote here with this green box is covering 3 countries, relatively far from each other. We have France, Bulgaria, and Hungary. And actually, the result is not very favorable from our end, because the question was, how you perceive, do you think that there's any involvement or need of involvement of patients as well as physicians in such kind of procedures? And you can clearly see that actually there's no involvement. This is a very sad information, I think. But there's a big need for this. So let me conclude with this patient's role introductory with specific cause, because I think it's very important to emphasize that we need to be prepared, that is for sure. But how we can be prepared? We need to ensure that patients are involved in these procedures. In order to have referable data, we need to document such kind of involvement, as well as invest in and publish such kind of procedures. Also, we know that the broadening of the participation is essential. There are many, many calls that how patients can contribute to these discussions. So as part of the preparatory, we need to ensure that skills are already available, or we have some possibilities to even broaden them. And once it comes to involvement of patients, as we try to document this involvement, we also need to evaluate and feedback. And with that, let me hand over back to Daniel, or probably to you, Radostin.
Thank you very much to all of you, Daniel, Svetoslav, Gergely, and Stefano, because now is question time, and I would like to ask you as a patient representative, what do you think about the patient involvement in HTA?
Yes, first of all, congratulations to all the speakers who made this very difficult topic very interesting and understandable. I can see that the importance of patient is, first of all, the fact that we are the one who are waiting. We wait during the trials, we wait the EMA approbation, and we also wait when someone else are doing the HTA decisions. And so it's important because to be present in order to make understand to these people that usually reasons only by numbers, figures, and money, that the reality is us, are the patient who are waiting for a cure. And second, I can assure to Daniel and that nowadays we have a patient representative and a patient expert that can do this this job, let's go, in the best way, and so they have the right, they have to be there to give the patient vision of these decisions.
Thank you, Stefano. Do we have, yes, Steve?
Give me a minute, I'm coming.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much. That's a really very interesting presentation. I take issue with the language you used at one point. You talked about involving patients somehow being less scientific. I would have said it was completely the reverse, that you can't be scientific in an HTA without ensuring that you get patient voice. And what I come on to after that is what you didn't mention about the new European regulation is that if you are a patient who has ever talked to a pharma company, you are not allowed to be an expert. So the experts who EMA will have are experts who know nothing about, if you like, I mean, our philosophy in EUPFF, and I think in many of our members, is seamless working between patients, clinicians, pharma, regulators. We all need to work together if we're going to really tackle pulmonary fibrosis. And what EMA here is creating barriers that make it impossible for patients to actually participate. We have with us a cadre of really, one of them on the stage, a cadre of really experienced patients who have invested a lot in learning about the drugs, learning about clinical trials, learning about patient experience data. And if suddenly EMA regards, it throws all of that knowledge to one side, the EMA process is frankly not going to work. So I think it might be useful because as a European Pulmonary Fibrosis Federation, we're not just the EU, we're the whole of Europe, as defined by WHO. And in that respect, it might be worth looking at what NICE does, or even going across to our new Europeans in Canada, who the Canadians also have a very good system. And I think there's much to learn. I'm very worried about what this new EMA system is going to do.
Many thanks, Steve. Actually, we were expecting for this question, so that was willfully not included in our presentation, and you are completely right. There is an ongoing work with HTA bodies. EUPFF is part of the stakeholder network of HTA, and this problem has been actually a long run and have a history. Also in EUNETA we have this problem, and we raised that how it is possible that for rare disease patients there's no possibility for caveat, especially what you mentioned. And I would rather broaden this perspective because it's not solely about having any speakers fee or having any consultancy fee from a pharmaceutical company, but the implementing act to the HTR giving even more when it says that once you are reimbursed by a pharmaceutical company to attend the conference, it might be also kind of a conflict of interest. So what it happened in the EUNETA is that they find a backdoor solution, referring that it is very difficult or even impossible to identify patients within the rare disease field having any conflict of interest. So they said that, okay, we approve on a case-by-case basis. But we are really unhappy with this solution, and we express our concerns that it should not be a kind of exemption, but it should be rather a kind of caveat or plus provision within the implementing act that for rare disease community or rare disease indications, there should be some easings from this very strict rule. And on the other hand, I also need to emphasize that everybody was really surprised about this new implementing act, because strangely, it is not reiterating the provisions of the EMA, but it has on top of that more and strict rules. And I think I should also reflect on how we actually consider or construe the proceedings received from the pharmaceutical company. And it's a very, very new, sad example from the oncology. And we just learned that it doesn't matter whether you as a patient receiving any funds directly from a pharmaceutical company, but once you are working, even though that you are not receiving any compensation from a a patient organization or just be an unpaid board member, and your patient organization is receiving pharma funds, it is also considered as a conflict of interest. One of the oncology patients was actually excluded from the very recent HTA proceedings. Our idea actually from the rare disease field was that we tried to build a nice Chinese wall between those patients, advocates or experts who are dealing with pharmaceutical companies in terms of research, in terms of raising awareness activities, and we try to have other patient experts who are not dealing with pharmaceutical companies, but it seems, based on this example, that it might be even more difficult for us to cope with this challenge.
And if I just may, Steve, I 100% agree what you said. And you're not alone in this. You know, like the physicians have the same problem. As soon as they are conducting a clinical trial, they're considered as biased. And actually, when you look into the academic literature, there's a lot of discussion around how to deal this and with these conflicts of interest. And the solution is not to exclude the experts. And I 100% agree the patients are super important experts to be considered. But there is a big fear, in my view, especially from the HTA agencies, that their scientific rigor by involving too many people, you know, could diminish basically the report itself. But here I would also encourage you to make this a political discussion, because in the end the HTA agencies have to do what the policymakers decide. And if the policymakers decide, hey, we want the patient voice, we want the you know, like the physician voice in the process, then you have a chance to be heard, because then they have to do it, no matter if their Cochrane, you know, methodology says otherwise.
I mean, there's some sense in which we as patients, patient advocates, are totally influenceable by pharma, so we have a conflict of interest, but clinicians don't. Now, I mean, there's something strange here.
Super
I would have thought
strange. It's wrong.
in basic human rights stuff, I think you could take legal advice on that. I mean, I think we have to be stronger. Maybe we have to make our voice louder to policymakers to change this. But we have the same thing. We're not allowed at ERS to go into the industry sessions as patient advocates. How crazy is that? You know, we're not allowed to have access to the latest information we need to do our work because of some patronizing attitude by people in the ERS or in the EMA. I think we've really got to challenge it. Sorry, I'll put my revolutionary badge away. Yeah, okay.
Just that you know, at ESMO, like the Oncology Congress, the patients were fighting for years and they are in now. So just, this is a fight you can win. But let's talk about this later.
And just a short reflection, I can make a parallel with my experience from the Ethics Committee for Clinical Trials in Bulgaria. I will never forget my first time in this committee. We had discussed a very complex, very complicated, actually, oncology study. And one of the professors in the committee said to the patient, you know that in ethics committee it's obligatory to have at least 2 people with non-medical education. And the patient in the committee said, okay, I want to say something about this study. And the oncology professor said, you are a non-medical, you don't know anything, so don't try. But actually, the reflection of the patient was very important, because the patient knows the patient journey. And the patient said, okay, the patient journey does not fit the design of the study. And if you approve the study in this way, you will have 0 participants. So everything will be lost. And it's the same. And in Bulgaria, it's very complicated with the patient part. I mean, you already said that it's a political decision. And in Bulgaria, it's very political, because we have the HTA and then have another procedure for the reimbursement. But what we advise the patients, to consult the clinical part. They are not clinical, but in the clinical part, you can explain what is the unmet need, medical need. And part of this knowledge can be sourced by the patients. So patients may consult the medical experts who are preparing the medical part without sitting on the table for negotiations.
Thank you, Svetoslav. More questions? Yes, Hulat?
Yes, thank you so much for this really interesting presentation. I agree with the comments before about the fact that you guys broke down a very complex, normally very dry subject and made it very interesting and accessible. So thank you for that. I had a question coming from the health equity perspective. It's one of my favorite topics. And that is that I know that the EU HTA also puts an explicit emphasis and calls for attention for vulnerable and marginalized groups. But now I know for rare diseases like PF, it's hard to have a focus on marginalized or vulnerable groups just because of the fact that it's a rare disease. There's already so few people. So I was just wondering if you have any practical advice or comments on this in the sense of how can we perhaps, you know, what can be potentially done in the HTA process as well, or what can patients do as they are involved so that there is at the end more of these unmet needs also from vulnerable groups to be met?
I try to answer this not easy question, to be frank. I think that the preparation should not be started at the HTA procedure, but at the protocol review and building up the clinical trial protocol. Once we arrive to the HTA phase, there might be some possibilities when we are talking about the letter P population, to build a little bit on subpopulation. But once you are in the HTA procedures without any data from the clinical trial, actually it's not possible. So I think that how EU PFF can work on equitability and also taking into consideration more vulnerable parts of the patient population is the way that once there's an ongoing clinical trial, we try to propose some sub-studies which might address such kind of difficulties.
Thank you, Gergely. Yes? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Just one more sentence. I totally agree, but the other decision is to use the real-world data as much as you have because it's a rare disease. And as you know, there is a EMA recommendation to widen the spectrum of patients in clinical trials. We need time until this spectrum is widened, is broadening, but for this time we can use the real-world clinical data.
Thank you, Svetoslav.
And just to have also said something, sorry. No, but your question, practically, what I would look, you need to look at this case by case, but what I would think about is, do I want to engage on the EU HTA level, which is probably more difficult to change something, or do I want to engage and orchestrate, on the local, in the country level, like where can we, make a change happen? Because I think changing a methodology at the EU level is very, very difficult. But in the end, it's what you both said. You need to keep fighting for acceptance of smaller powered clinical trials, acceptance of real-world evidence data, of specific endpoints, etc. PP. It's very pragmatically speaking.
Thank you, Eleni. Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to say, as a simple patient, I'm very jealous about Steve. He knows very much things, and I'd like to be like him. As a simple patient, I think patients can bring a perspective that clinical trials and economic models often miss. And they can give the lived experience of the disease, symptoms, daily life, and all this that we every day have to deal with. Also, treatment preferences, side effects versus benefits, because something maybe be very good, but it's very difficult from the side of side effects. And of course, quality of life consideration is something that is very important for patients. And I will close my thought about that I said for Steve before. I think that as a patient, I need to be trained in these topics in order to be more useful and to contribute in this process as a patient. I don't know how we'll do it, through our association, through something else, I don't know. I think that I need to be trained and to be very confident and give as much as I can. Thank you very much.
Maybe just one small comment. First of all, I share the admiration for Steve, and these people make a big difference. But at the same time, I want to say it's not only, I mean, of course, training is important, but I have experienced in medical committee meetings where they were like inviting patients, and then they were discussing health economic models like Markov models, and like, you know, like I couldn't follow, and I did my PhD on this. So like I was like, and then they were like saying, you see, you know, like they're not contributing, so it doesn't make sense to involve them. And I think this is fundamentally wrong. You need to reduce the complexity, no matter how difficult that is, in order to get the insights that you need. And I think once you're able to speak the same language, and of course you need from both, like people coming from both sides, but if you're able to ask the right questions, you will get so much, you know, like information and value into the modeling as well. So I fully agree with that, and this needs to come from both sides, 100%.
Thank you. More questions? Yeah.
If I may add, actually there are many educational materials available. You need to know that the countries are following different pathways in this term. So EURORDIS also made, European Patient Forum also made, but some countries like Hungary, we are following our own rules, so we have a special one which is delivered in Hungarian. So you should have a look, and I think EUPFF might also help in member organization in sharing these kind of resources. You might dive in and learn more. However, you need to always keep in mind that there's no request from your end to be expert of the procedure itself. You should not be as a watchdog ensuring the transparency of the complete procedure, but rather making a kind of sensitivity check, like being, you know, kind of, this is stupid or not, kind of question. But there's no kind of request from patients that you need to challenge the anchor or unanchored models, how you compare directly or indirectly some of the outcomes, whether the clinical trial cover a comparison already available in that specific indication. So this is not our rule. As you pointed rightly out, we need to bring the patient perspective into the discussion.
Thank you, Gergely. Colleagues, do we have some questions online? Here in the room. Do you have something to add?
Well, as far as the last question is concerned, I would just say that nobody knows better what the patient feels than the patient. We can evaluate clinical trials. I mean, you are not medical people, and it's not your job to evaluate the results of the clinical trials. But you are the most valuable source that can help us evaluate these results in the proper way. That's all.
Well, if we don't have more questions, I think that even earlier, Alba, we can close the session. Thank you very much again to Daniel, Svetoslav, Gergely, and Stefano. We have here, and myself, actually I'm from Bulgaria like Svetoslav, from 4 countries representatives. So you saw the different points of view in these 4 countries and the perspective of our panelists regarding HTA. Thank you very much for your presence. And yes, Alba?
Radostina, you're the first one who haven't seen any of these cards. This is very good. Congratulations.
Yes.
And you give everyone 10 more minutes. So again, coffee break, and we're gonna be ready for the last part of the day. So we have 2 sessions, one happening here in the Silver Hall, moderated by Jean-Michel, who's gonna be talking about prevention and early diagnosis. And then we have the workshop on the 2nd floor about caregivers. We're gonna work together on designing a survey to understand the needs of pulmonary fibrosis caregivers. So we encourage to take part on that one. There's still a few slots available. So enjoy the coffee break, and we see you in, 45 minutes. Thank you very much.